All right, guys. Hello. Welcome to the first solo podcast. I wish it was on a topic that was a little better, a little different, not so sad, not so terrible. But I kind of felt compelled to make a solo podcast on this subject because even though most of you probably know I'm not very political at all, like I don't post anything political and, never talking about it, I do keep track of it and I do listen to it and I consume a ton of news. And I don't like talking about it because obviously this day and age, everyone's all polarized and everyone has their views and they're stubborn in their views. And if you go against those views in any way, they automatically paint you as the opposite side. There's no middle ground, and I consider myself very in the middle. In the middle as far as like politically, as far as socially and economically, I probably lean very, very far left. But I don't think people who don't hold those views or who are on the opposite side of that are bad. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. I have a lot of friends that come from both sides, and I love them both the same. So having said that, this situation in Gaza and Palestine seems to be kind of polarizing, and I'm not too sure why, because to me, it seems like an easy subject. I think it was, October 7th, there was an attack on Israel, killing, I think, 1,400. Let's see, I got some stuff up here, but, bear with me. I'm going to have to flip through a couple pages to get all the facts right. And my goal with this is just to, state facts and then give my opinion on them. And it has to be long form like this, because just a simple post, if I just posted something in support of either Israel or Palestine, people will automatically think that I'm against the other, and this is not true. So like most things, everything is a nuanced discussion, and most of the time these days, that gets lost. You have to be either one or the other, or, whatever the case may be. But I wanted to make a podcast on this because I wanted nuanced discussion. I want you to know my whole opinion, and I want everyone, to be educated on what's going on, because, it's okay to not really want to get into this. I understand if people don't even want to get into these kind of things because it's pretty nasty. For the most part, no one likes war, and when it's as polarizing as this, it's just not good, table conversation. But it needs to be stated anyway, because what's going on right now, in my opinion, is pretty bad. And we're kind of just letting it go. And our government is helping with some of the terrible things that are happening. And I guess I want to start with some of the history of this conflict, because it probably goes back further than you think. I have probably the best new thing that's ever come out in the past, I don't know, 20 years. ChatGPT helped me out with this. So we're going to go over a very, very, very brief history of the Israel-Palestinian conflict and how it all started. And I'm just going to read from what it says. It's 10 bullet points. It should go quick. But this all started in the late 19th and early 20th century. The roots of the conflict can be tracked back to the late 19th century, where Jewish immigrants began settling in Palestine as part of the Ottoman Empire. The Zionist movement, which sought to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine, gained momentum during this period. And then there's the Balfour Declaration, 1917. During World War I, the British government issued Balfour Declaration, which expressed support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. And declaration set the stage for future tensions. All right. And then we'll go on to British Mandate in 1920 through 1948. After World War I, the League of Nations granted Britain the mandate to govern Palestine. This period saw increased Jewish immigration, Arab protests, and violent clashes between the two communities. Okay, so let's stop there for a second. People call this colonialism, and they're right. Palestinians have been living there for hundreds, if not thousands of years before this, and after World War I and during World War II, when obviously we know what happened then. The Holocaust was horrible and terrible, but the Jews did not have a state. And the Zionist movement set to make a state in Palestine, which is where the Bible basically says, or the Torah basically says, this is where the nation of Jews or Israelis is supposed to be. Having said that, this place has been inhabited by Palestinians for hundreds of years before that. So basically, they're coming in to this country now and basically taking it over, setting up their own government, pushing out the people who've lived there for hundreds of years. And some people think that's wrong. I think that's wrong. This is not something that should have happened. Now, having said that, America has a history of this. We came here, we settled, there's Indians and we pushed them out and all this other stuff. I don't want to get caught up in saying if that should have been done or is that bad. If it were to happen today, it's wrong. It already happened. I'm of the opinion that you can't really dwell on the past and be like, oh, our nation is illegitimate because we took it from people. If you did that, you'd have to go back in history and everybody at some point took land or did atrocities, and it's just going to get really, really messy. The way I see it is you pick up from what we can change now and move forward to not do anything like that in the future. So having said that, is Israel an occupying nation? I'm going to say yes. That doesn't mean that Jews should, or Israelis should, give up everything they have right now, give it back to the Palestinians and be homeless and be, second-class citizens or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. But what's happening now is because Israel has come in, Palestinians are now the second-class citizens, and they push them into the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and we'll get into this. Let's keep going with the history, but I just wanted to make a brief mention that the Zionist movement was basically bringing Jews to the Palestine area and basically settling there and pushing the Palestinians out. Okay, so we go on. The UN partition plan. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a partition plan that would divide Palestine into a separate Jewish and Arab state. So here we go. This is called the two-state solution, I think it's called, where basically the Jews get a certain portion and then the Palestinians get their own. With an international administration of Jerusalem, the plan was to accept a Jewish leadership, but was rejected by the Arab states and Palestinians. Okay, so, of course, the Arab states and the Palestinians don't want this because they were there first and now they feel like they're being pushed out. And, why would they allow this to happen? If this happened in our country right now to this day, if someone came and started occupying us, we'd be saying the same thing. So that's not completely unreasonable. Then there was the War of Independence following the declaration of the State of Israel. On May 1948, neighboring Arab states invaded, resulting in the first Arab and Israeli war. The war ended in a aristemic agreement, leaving Israel in control of more territory than it originally allocated by the UN partition plan. So basically, the Israelis won, probably with the help of Western countries like Britain, possibly the United States. I don't know for sure, but they definitely had help from European countries, or at least the West. We're going to call it the West for now. Then there's the Palestinian displacement called the Nakba. This is kind of important on the Arab side. They speak about this a lot because this was basically a pivotal moment where a lot of bad things happened. And in this Nakba, the 1948 war resulted in the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs, which is known as the Nakba, or the catastrophe in Arabic. Then there was the Six-Day War. In 1976, another conflict known as the Six-Day War saw Israelis capturing the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. These territories have since been central to the conflict. So this is basically the Israelis taking more and more land as time goes by. And let me get back to this Nakba thing. This Nakba, 100, you know, thousands of Palestinians displaced. This is basically their Trail of Tears, right? Here in the States, back in the day, there was a Trail of Tears where we, displaced tons of Indians into reservations and stuff like that, and it was obviously a terrible thing. This is basically the Trail of Tears for Palestinians. Then also, as time go on, Israelis keep pushing and pushing and pushing for more and more land. Then in the 1993, there was the Oslo Accords, which is a series of agreements known as the Oslo Accord, were signed, aiming to establish a framework for Palestinian governance in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. However, the peace process faced setbacks and violence. So this was another solution to try and, give governance to Palestinians and to Israelis, but this inevitably fell apart because there was disputes over how much land. Basically, Israeli keeps pushing and pushing and pushing for more, and Palestinians keep pushing back because they are being slowly pushed out of their country. And if you look at a map now at Israel, the Gaza Strip is this tiny, tiny little thing in the bottom left-hand corner. And imagine you had all of Israel at one point, and now you're pushed to this little corner of the map over the course of decades. You're not going to like that. And it's going to grow resentment. And we'll get to this. And this is another reason why, in my opinion, terrorism seems to be so prevalent, is because when you do things like this, you're going to breed hatred for the people doing this and the people supporting this. And of course, if you grow up as a child and you have people telling you, we have invaders coming, taking our land and killing our people, of course, you're going to grow up, hating these people and probably wanting to seek revenge. So after those Oslo Accords, there's something called the Second Intifada. The failure of the Oslo Accords process and other factors led to the outbreak of the Second Intifada, a period of intense conflict with suicide bombings, Israeli military incursions, and sufficient loss of life. So this is basically bringing us into modern times of how this conflict starts to pan out. This has been happening for decades. If you're like me, I didn't pay any attention to any of this stuff, probably up until the last couple of years, and definitely of the last couple of weeks after the Hamas attack, and we're going to get to that in a second. And obviously, to this day, there's been conflicts ongoing every year. Every couple of years, there seems to be a big outbreak, where either Palestinians fight back and there's a huge loss of life, and then Israel hits even harder. So we're going to get into some numbers here, but there's a massive disparity in the death count between Israel and Palestinians. And this has to do with a power imbalance between Israel and the Palestinians. The Palestinians basically have no power. They have very limited weapons, and the weapons they do have are, not very good. But the United States supplies weapons to Israel. They're much more militaristically capable, so they can kill a lot more people with the weapons they have. So that's basically a brief history. So you kind of know that this wasn't something that just started. This has been going on for decades, before you were born, before any of us were born. And basically these are boiling points, very heated areas where, things get really, really bad. So this is going to bring us to the Hamas attacks. So on October 7th, Hamas invaded from the Gaza Strip into Israel and did a pretty horrible terrorist attack that killed 1,400 people and have taken 240 hostages. So when this happened, rightfully so, there was a big outcry and sympathy for Israelis, because I didn't see the videos, but there were videos circulating of pretty horrible and terrible things. And let's, for a moment, get into who Hamas is. So Hamas is a Palestinian militant and political organization founded in 1987 during the first Intifada. I think we kind of briefly covered that. It emerged as an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Hamas is considered a terrorist organization by several countries, including the United States and Israel and other European Union. Hamas is a military wing known as the Izzaladin la Quaz. I'm going to butcher these names, sorry. Izzaladin la Quanzam brigades, which has been involved in armed conflict in Israel, including the rocket attacks and suicide bombings. So they're doing, terrorist attacks in order to liberate Palestinians from the occupation by the Israelis, according to them. But Hamas also has a political wing that has participated in Palestinian elections. And the last time they won was in 2006. They won the majority of seats. There has not been elections in Palestine since then, or in the Gaza Strip since then. And from what I've read, the majority of Palestinians are younger than 18. Not the majority. I think half of the Palestinians are under the age of 18. And the reason for this, all the older men have been fighting and dying, since this whole thing occurs. So, they don't get to grow old. So the most of them are going to be women and children, right? And I have seen the videos, right? Like we said, the Palestinians see Israel as an occupating force, and that's going to breed hatred. I've seen tons of propaganda by probably Hamas and, whoever, trying to convert children to hate the Palestinians. And that's probably not a hard thing to do. If you're a Palestinian and you're a kid and you're growing up and you get routinely bombed, even before these attacks, Israel would, bomb a hospital here, bomb a church there. It's always as a way to try and defeat Hamas militants within Gaza, because Hamas is the force that wants to kill Israelis. Having said that, you're always going to have civilian casualties when they live amongst civilians, right? This is the hard part about defeating terrorism. When I hear the United States or anybody saying, "Oh, we need to defeat terrorism," that's like you want to defeat murder or you want to defeat rape. It's like it's not something you defeat. It's not a country. It's not a person. Like terrorism is an act. The only thing you can do is mitigate that act. What is the root cause of that act? And then you got to, try to tackle it from there. And it's usually not going to be with bombs and missiles and killing people. That's actually going to breed more of that kind of behavior or that kind of terrorism. So, okay, so that's who Hamas is, right? Hamas is this militant group that they haven't had elections since 2006. So since the majority of Palestinians are under the age of 18, that means most Palestinians have not even voted for Hamas. I think they did a study, or they did a calculation where like only 7% of the people living in Palestine right now actually voted in 2006 for Hamas. So when you hear people say like, "Oh, well, the Palestinians voted for Hamas, therefore this represents all Palestinians," that's just not true. And even if it was, let's just say it was true, right? And the majority of Palestine, let's say 60% of Palestinians voted for Hamas and are okay with what Hamas is doing. That doesn't mean it represents everybody in the country. That's like saying Donald Trump, when he was president, represented you. You probably, if you're a liberal or didn't like Donald Trump, you'd probably say no. And vice versa. That's like saying the Democratic Party and or Joe Biden represents all of America, or you in particular. If you're a conservative, you're probably going to say like, hell no. So even you got to separate government from people. This is one of the most important points I want to get across in this podcast is there's a difference between your government and the people. And for the most part, even in a democracy, it's never, your government usually is doing things you hate. Here in the United States, the approval rating for Congress is like in the 20%. And yet they're supposed to represent the people, you know? And it has to do with a lot of things with two-party system and, how it doesn't represent us very well. We're not going to get into that right now. But having said that, when you hear me criticize Israel, I'm going to criticize the Israeli government and its officials. I am not criticizing the Israeli people or Jews. This is where the nuance of the discussion has to come into play. I'm specifically criticizing the tactics used by the government themselves. So if you hear me criticize Israel, I'm criticizing the Israeli government. On the other hand, if you hear me criticize Palestinians, I'm going to use Hamas, because Hamas is the force that's fighting back. There's some people that say that's justified. In my opinion, killing innocent people is absolutely never justified. I don't care what it is. Even if you have an occupying force, you're not justified to go kill the innocent people doing that. All of this, in my opinion, needs to be talked about. Without violence, right? Throughout history, violence has never really solved anything unless you want to commit genocide and just completely kill everyone. And some people think this is what Israel's trying to do. And in my opinion, it kind of looks that way. It's been slowly happening over the decades. And it's hard for me to not come to a conclusion like that. Because even when you hear people like Netanyahu and then all of the senior officials, they are painting Palestinians with a broad brush, not Hamas. They'll condemn Hamas, but they'll also paint Palestinians in general like they're the evil ones, we're the good ones. And that's not true. If you're under 18 and you're a child, by definition, you are innocent, because those are your most impressionable years. You can't fault a child for living in an environment that could breed him to do terrorist acts. That's not how we do. We don't punish children for that kind of stuff. And probably every single person that's going to listen to this would agree, no matter what side you're on, right? So the nuance of the discussion is we have to separate the people and the innocent people from the leaders or the government. So from now on, I'm going to use Israeli government when I'm going to criticize, and then Hamas when I criticize. And that is going to be separate from Palestinian people and Israelis and or Jews, right? These are separate things, all right? To criticize the Israeli government is not to be anti-Semitic, all right? And to criticize Hamas, doesn't mean I'm Islamophobic, okay? As a matter of fact, those are horrible arguments, and it's lazy to just paint somebody like that when they have a valid criticism. So we went over what Hamas did, right? They made that attack on October 6th. They came in, they did a horrible thing that is condemnable, and everyone should condemn it. And if you're not condemning it, that's a problem, right? Anytime any civilian dies, in which all of these were civilians, I think some of them were part of the military, it's not to excuse it, but, I'm trying to focus on killing of civilians right here. 1,400 Israelis were killed in that attack. That's a lot. That's actually a lot of people in like one attack over the course of a day or two, however long, the siege lasted. And they took 240 hostages. Okay? So ever since then, Israel has obviously basically declared war on Palestine and has been indiscriminately bombing buildings and killing thousands of people. And this is what we're going to get into now. We're going to get into the amount of people that have died since then by the Israeli offensive, or whatever you want to call it, with the strike back. Okay, so I'm going to read off some numbers here. The death toll from Israeli bombardment in the Gaza Strip has risen to 9,500 as of today, which is, I think, November 5th. And this is going to increase, right? Because the bombing has not stopped, and this is going to continue to increase. And where it stops depends on how much, pressure from the outside world is put on Israel to stop this. And ultimately, this podcast is to try to convince you that there needs to be a ceasefire at the very minimum. We can talk about solutions after, but ceasefire for sure, and that needs to happen immediately. Because the majority of these 5,000 or 9,500 deaths are innocent people, children, with well over half of them women and children. Here we go. So out of 9,500 people, over half of them are women and children, right? And if you go online and you Google these things, you're going to see pictures of very, very, very horrible things, all right? So the rate at which Israel is killing innocent people compared to that terrorist attack by Hamas is overtaken by what? 4 or 5 times more? So it's a significantly more, and it's going to continue to rise. Loss of life, right? Innocent life. The death toll in the result of the Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip since October 7th is 9,500, including 3,900 children and 2,509 women. The Israeli raids led to the destruction of 55 mosques, 3 universities, 3 churches, and 5 buildings belonging to the Ministry of Endowment and Religious Affairs in Gaza. So, if you didn't know this, there are rules of war and there are war crimes. And technically, you're not supposed to be destroying churches and universities and, medical facilities. We're going to get to the medical facilities now, actually. So 16 hospitals have been bombed. 32 primary care units and 27 ambulances were damaged, in addition to 105 medical institutions. So they're attacking the hospitals, basically. And on top of this, they shut off electricity and water to Gaza, which is already another war crime that, you're shutting this off not just to Hamas, you're shutting this off to all the innocent women and children and people in Gaza, all the normal people. You just cut off food and water, or not food and water, I'm sorry, water and electricity. So, there's horror stories of them having to, drink seawater and all this other stuff. So this is a very medieval siege style tactic to use, the very barbaric one to take away these things from the Gaza people. All in the name of trying to defeat Hamas. Now, if you wanted to defeat Hamas, you're going to have to do it the hard way, right? You're going to have to send in special ops and all these other things to try and kill the leaders and this and that. It's not an easy thing. I'm not saying this is an easy thing to do. But the alternative to just indiscriminately bomb buildings in hope of getting a couple Hamas leaders or militants while killing way more civilians instead, that's not an option in my opinion. And it shouldn't be in yours. And if someone were to ask you, this way or that way, meaning bomb indiscriminately and kill innocent people, you would probably say no, right? You would definitely say no. No one is for killing women and children. Most people are not for this. And this is what the point I'm trying to get across is once you know these things, you can't just listen. And the media is another thing. That's probably going to have to be saved for another podcast, but because the United States backs Israel, the media has been covering in Israel's favor as if this is justified action, and it's not justified action. Most, human rights groups are saying this is extremely bad and massive amount of human rights violations are happening because of this war, and in certain situations like the Ukraine-Russia invasion, Russia invading Ukraine, it was justified for Ukraine to defend themselves because you have this massive country and military force invading a less powerful nation, a sovereign nation. It is just everyone, believes that Ukraine is justified to defend themselves. In this case, you have a more powerful country backed by us and Western countries, by the way. This is why they're more powerful, who has slowly invaded a less powerful nation and slowly taking their land and slowly killing their people. So now we're on the opposite side. It's like if you wanted to be on the side of Russia invading Ukraine, being okay with Israel doing this, you're basically taking that position. I'm using it as kind of like an analogy or a metaphor. I mean, it's not exactly the same, of course, but Israel is the more powerful country, and they're backed by us, and we give them billions of dollars in order to do these things and a bunch of weapons in order to do this. And it's because they're our ally in the region. This can go back to, United States imperialism and us trying to do geopolitics and stuff like that. We're not going to get into it into this podcast, but that's a whole nother thing that you should look into. But yeah, if we come back to this thing that Israel is the more powerful nation, slowly taking land and killing the Palestinian people, I don't see the argument against that, right? Like, the more you do this, there's one of two results, right? If the goal, and this should not be the goal, but the goal seems to be to extinguish the Palestinian people, or at least, take away their entire land, meaning the whole Gaza Strip and the whole West Bank, all right? And maybe you push these people into Egypt, which this looks to be what's happening. You're not going to stop Hamas and terrorist acts because all these people you now just pushed into a different country that they're not a part of. That's like someone pushing us into Mexico and being like, okay, live here now. That's going to grow this resentment. There has been war in this area for decades, centuries, and it has not solved anything, right? It has not solved anything. So I do believe that the Israeli government is definitely thinking about doing what they're calling an ethnic cleansing, meaning they want to extinguish the Palestinian people. That may be a far stretch, and you might not agree with that. To me, it just seems that way. And this is not to say that Jews or the Israelis want to do this. This is their government that is doing this. And the approval rating right now of Netanyahu, the president, is pretty bad, even amongst their own people. So that's one route that seems to be taken. The other route is there needs to be a ceasefire. This is the route that needs to happen. There needs to be a ceasefire, which means immediately stopping the bombing, which means immediately stopping the killing of innocent people. This is what needs to happen. All right? And for us to sit here, most people want to ignore this situation, and I can understand why you want to ignore this. But I have Arab friends, and I know Arabic people, and they are taking this extremely hard right now. So for them to see this and people living it over there, and for the United States to keep this thing going by supplying Israel with all the weapons and not calling for a ceasefire and allowing this to happen, this is going to grow resentment. And, people who have been affected by this are going to want to take retribution, and they're going to do terrorist acts, and it's not going to stop this cycle of terrorism that we're doing. The hard way to do it is to do a ceasefire, and there's two things. There's the one-state solution and the two-state solution. I am a proponent of the one-state solution, which is going to be the hardest, whereas you make Gazans or Palestinians basically equal to Israelis, and they're allowed to vote. They're allowed to be part of the system. They become one nation, basically. Is that the hard approach? That is absolutely the hard approach, because there's going to be there's going to be tons of pushback from this on both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side. There's going to be trying to get these two people to probably come together is near impossible task, but necessary. Because the way I see it is, over time, people will integrate, but it's going to take generations and it's going to be hard work. I mean, if you look at we're tribal people, so we're always going to, back our tribe or be afraid of the other. And over time, we're slowly using our higher brain and trying to evolve our way out of this kind of thinking. And I think that's the hard thing, but it's the necessary. At some point, hopefully, most humans in the world will agree that we all need to learn to live with each other, right? Like, all of this war and fighting, like, we should have basic human rights that apply to everybody in the world, right? Everybody in the world. Things like food, fresh water, electricity, voting rights. The rights we have here should be applied to everybody in the world. This is the hope, right? You're only going to do that if you go through the hard process of integrating people together. That's not going to be popular right now, because especially with the tension that's going on, but in the long run that needs to happen. And I believe at some point humans will eventually, as generations go on, learn that this is the way it's going to have to be. But you can't do this while you're killing the other people and trying to extinguish them, right? So that's one solution, the one state solution, where you give them rights, they become, part of the system, and they have all the same rights that Israelis do. The second one is what they've been trying to do over the last couple of decades, is a two-state solution where, Palestinians have their land, Israel. That's kind of what's happening right now. But then, when you have Israel pushing and pushing and pushing for more, which they have been doing, you're going to get these terrorist attacks where, people like Hamas are going to push back. This is a natural response, right? If someone broke into your house and said, I own half this house now, you're probably not going to like that. And you're probably going to push against that. So a real two-state solution would be give Palestinians the land they want. And everyone's going to try to push for more, but a line has to be drawn in the sand somewhere. And then do not break these accords or agreements or whatever they want to call it. And then, leave them to be. That's another one that could work. But they've been trying to do this for decades, and for some reason, the Israeli government wants to push for more. Now, a criticism I have of the Israeli government is its officials are using like biblical justification to the land. I'm going to tell you right now, I am an atheist. I don't believe in any religion that exists out there. Maybe Buddhism, but that's another podcast, and that one I will make. But I don't believe that a book written thousands of years ago has any bearing on what should happen today, right? Now, I know a lot of people are going to be religious and they're going to believe in certain things. And if that's your thing, that's fine. I don't have anything against religious people. My parents are religious, okay? I'm not talking about if you want to believe in it, you're allowed to believe in whatever you want. I personally don't, because, like I said, a book that was written thousands of years ago that is probably lost in translation, throughout the centuries, so whatever was written back then has probably been changed multiple times throughout history. We have no way to know. That has no bearing on what should happen today. So in biblical terms, that this is the Israelis' land, this belongs to them, and Christians are using the justification that these are the end times and the Jews need to have their land because that's what it says in the book of Revelation and on. None of that is justification. And you got the leaders, Netanyahu, using this now as a way to justify the destruction of the Palestinians. That to me is absolutely disgusting and unjustified. and unintellectual, and everybody, even if you believe in religion, you should know that that is not something we can live by. It's not. Any religion that justifies the killing of people is not going to sit pretty with anyone, nor should it. Okay, so you can't be using religion to justify colonization and or killing of anybody for any reason. And I'll take this back to, Palestinians and the Arab countries as well. If there's any justification in the Quran or in Islam, that says you must kill a certain group of people, infidels, whatever it may be. I'm sorry, I'm not extremely educated on this, so I'm just spitballing and guessing about what it could be. That's still wrong to me. That's just as wrong. And, is despicable and horrible and, should not be allowed in modern times. So both situations are not good, right? And should not be allowed. So there should be no religious justification on any side to kill people or to take land or whatever it may be. But it is being used right now by the Israeli government, to justify what's happening. So these are my current thoughts on what's happening. I do think this is a pretty important subject and thing that's happening, because I actively see our government helping what is essentially a slow and steady genocide of Palestinian people. And once I did the research to figure this out, or to find out what was going on, I was stunned that this is going on in 2023, in my lifetime, by my government, and by supposedly, intelligent people, or at least, because this is also a non-political thing. Like, even in our country, Republican leaders are 100% backing the Israeli government and what they're doing. Every single one of them. I haven't seen one detract, one call for a ceasefire. They're basically calling for genocide, along with the Israeli government. And then on the Democratic side, they're a little bit more tepid about it, where they're saying, oh yeah, we should respect, the loss of life, and we shouldn't do it, and this and that. Yet they're in control right now, and they're still allowing this to happen. Not calling for ceasefires. No one's calling for, I think like maybe 10 or 12 Democrats in the House are calling for a ceasefire. Other than that, the establishment Democrats are, putting out their little statements about we should respect human life and not cause any more civilian casualties. Yet they still fund it. It's still funded across the board. And reasons for that, I kind of don't know, but like I said, it has to do with geopolitics, and that's a whole nother podcast. But once I found out that our government is backing this kind of behavior, it just doesn't seem right to me at all. And I felt compelled to make a podcast about this subject, just for the fact that I don't want to see this kind of death and destruction being funded and or supported by a country that I live in. That people can argue that we've been doing this in the Middle Eastern countries since 9/11 or even before that, right? And yeah, I would agree with you. The United States has not had a good track record for, what do they call it, global dominance or imperialism, or what, all these, fancy academic words that liberal people like to use. I'm kind of on board with that. I understand where you're coming from. But this particular situation requires a vehemently denunciation of what we're doing. And I can't just do it in a post, like I said, because if I just post about this, people are going to think I'm taking one side and not the other. I am on the side of saving as many innocent lives as possible, whether it's coming from the Israeli side or whether it's coming from the Palestinian side. I choose no war. I would choose no life, or no innocent lives killed. All right? For me, this will always be my position. whether it's my side doing it, someone else's side doing it, all people are the same to me. All innocent lives have equal value. And we should call out when atrocities are happening on any side, your side, the other side, whatever it may be. So those are my thoughts. I wish my first solo podcast wasn't on this type of subject. It's not a good one. This is probably going to be the last time I'm going to touch it. If you disagree with anything I say, you can talk to me. If you know me, because right now the only people listening to this podcast are people that know me. I'm always willing to talk about this if it's going to be done in a respectful way, and knowing that I come from a place of good faith, like I'm not trying to criticize Jews or Israelis. I'm criticizing their government for what they're doing. But I'm not trying to criticize individual people. Okay? I will never blame a Jew or an Israeli individual for the things that their government are doing. It's not something I do. But if you have any issues with what I say, you can talk to me. If you don't know me, but you're listening to this on one of these platforms, especially YouTube, you can leave the comment. I'll answer it. But this is the best format that I can possibly put my opinion out there. And I'm hoping that with this little bit of information and lasting this long through this podcast, that you'll be able to do your own research and come to your own conclusion, because the tides are kind of turning on this. At first it was blatant support behind Israel. You're probably going to start seeing news outlets finally catching up to what's happening. And you're probably going to see more things come out about how we need to stop this. And, you should care a little bit about things like this, because our government is backing what's happening. And what's happening is absolutely terrible. And the history books are not going to look kindly on this type of thing. So I just wanted to share my thoughts about what's going on right now. And I thought this would be the best way to do it, especially since I have a podcast. I don't know how well this is going to do. I don't know if this is going to lose me people or not, but I kind of don't care. I started this podcast to talk about the things I care about and the things I think that are important. But like I said, I'm open to criticism as long as it's constructive. I'm open to talking about it if you have a different view. Or if you agree with me, let me know, because I definitely know I'm not the only one, but this issue seems to have split people in this country to the point where just no one's talking about it. And I don't think that's right. And it's because people get scared that if, like I said, you have a certain point of view, that you are automatically against the other person. We got to stop that, man. We have to. This polarization is absolutely dumb and not smart and not intellectual, and everything should have a nuanced opinion, whether you're on the right or the left or anything. You should not, if you have an opinion, that should not mark you as a certain type of person or belonging to a certain group. We need to get over that kind of stuff. So, like I said, those are my thoughts. Let me know if you agree, disagree, or have any comments. But if you listen this long, I appreciate it. And yeah, have a good one. Peace out.